Assalamu alaikum and a pleasant day to each one of you. In general, it is very important to be wise in selecting a qualified civil engineer for a certain project. The most qualified civil engineer in a project will have a good result. And also, the client should consider the experiences of the civil engineer for the selection. There is a basis for selecting a qualified civil engineer. The client should have criteria for selection, and he or she must define the proposed scope of the project, or it is the statement of the project's performance. Before the selection of a qualified civil engineer, the client must join to an organization like the selection committee for a client to help about how to be wise and what should be the considered from a civil engineer. And to avoid some conflict of interest, the client should choose individuals that know how to demonstrate the objectives of a project. And the role of a committee is that to make a recommendation after conducting an investigations, interviews, and inquiries. The QBS, or the qualification based section, was published and established by the United States Congress and further developed as a process for public agencies to use for the selection of architectural and engineering services for public construction projects. It is a competitive procurement process whereby consulting firms submit qualifications to a procuring entity or owner who evaluates and selects the most qualified firm and then negotiates the project scope of work, schedule, budget, and consultant fees. Public owners have developed policies and procedures for qualifications based selection to govern procurement in which price is not the determining factor in selection. Price is considerable to QBS, or qualification based section, but not the purpose of the public owner's determination of the most suitable and qualified provider of construction service. A contract for civil engineering services that is used to supplement the client's staff by providing an extension for existing disciplines and by adding special disciplines, the capabilities already on board, but these are not available on the client. It is to assist the client in advertising and obtaining bids or negotiating proposal for each separate prime construction contract. Maintains a record of prospective bidders to whom bidding documents have been issued. Attend pre-bid conferences and receive the processed deposits for bidding documents. Issue addenda as appropriate to interpret, clarify, expand or amend the bidding documents. Assist the client in determining the qualifications and acceptability of prospective contractors, subcontractors, and materials suppliers. Advise the client on the acceptability of alternative materials and equipment proposed by the prospective constructors. When substitution prior to the award of contracts is allowed by the bidding documents, attend the bid opening, prepare bid tabulation sheets, and assist the client in evaluating bids or proposals and in assembling and awarding contracts for construction, materials, equipment, and services. From the word itself to envelope system. The first envelope is that the submission of technical proposals. But before the submission, it should be reviewed carefully of the client. Second envelope is that the price proposal of the project. The client should review this proposal and he or she can use this as a basis for negotiation of contractual scope and fees. The charging for civil engineering services are usually computed using one of the six methods. This method or combinations of methods used depends upon the nature, scope, and complexity of the services required by the owner. Each of the method is described in the standard form of agreement between owner and engineer for professional services, published by the Engineers Joint Contract Documents Committee. This document can be purchased from the American Council of Engineering Companies. The civil engineer and the client should reach an agreement on salary ranges for classification of services applicable. Then, the salary is direct salaries plus employment benefits. And the direct salary times multiplier is single multiplier to the unburned direct labor cost like risk and profit. And also the one multiplier is basic, one for definitive cost, and other multiplier is for project to project basis. Same with salary cost time multiplier method. It includes all compensation. Non-salary expenses are a separate item of reimbursement, usually with service charge. The term per diem normally refers to an 8-hour day. Direct personnel services are frequently charged on a per diem basis. It is an amount to compensate the civil engineer for contingencies, interest on invest capital, readiness to serve, and profit. The cost plus fixed fee basis requires that the client and the civil engineer define and agree upon the scope of services the civil engineer is to perform. A strategy that approach where you establish a set price for each customer or client, regardless of the actual time and materials used for a project. Engineers are licensed professionals who must earn at least a bachelor's degree and have several years of work experience before being allowed to practice on their own. So the requirements are equivalent to what lawyers or doctors go through. So you should expect to pay appropriately for their services. Engineer is paid by the hour, as lump sum, or as a percentage of the construction cost. The fee is depends on the size and scope of the project. Schedule of minimum basic fees, principles to be observed. When doing work on foreign assisted project or in projects where international consultants participate, the civil engineer performing similar or equivalent work should accept compensation that approximates the international standards rate. Civil engineers regularly employed in the private sector shall have a minimum compensation corresponding to 10% more than the minimum wage prevailing in the region as basic monthly salary. Civil engineers employed in the government sector shall have a minimum basic monthly salary corresponding to appropriate entry positions provided by the Civil Service Commission. A civil engineer employed in the private sector who signs and seals the civil engineering plans, specifications, and other related documents of a certain project for and in behalf of his employers shall be compensated with a minimum of 10% of the professional fee for the project over and above the basic monthly salary.
For Group 1, simple structure such as lofts, warehouse, garage, shades, market buildings, and comparable projects of one but not more than 2 stories. For Group 2, buildings of 3 stories up to 14 stories, towers, tanks, exhibition buildings, memorials, industrial buildings, simple bridges, low dams, piers, wharves, bins and silos and comparable. For Group 3, buildings with 15 or more floors, long span and complex bridges, high dams, major port works, power plants, and other complex structure, not Group 1 and 2. For Group 4, hotel, large apartment buildings, office buildings, shopping centers, store buildings, resorts, hospitals, and comparable projects. Structure not falling in any group shall be classified into Group 2. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and pleasant day to each one of you. In general, it is an estimated construction cost that must be approved by the client before the invitation to submit technical proposals is issued. These costs, which include audits, the cost of issuing bonds, land costs, and borrowed money during the construction, are part of the probable total project cost and can be estimated in cooperation with the client because they are usually outside the knowledge and control of the civil engineer. Professional engineering cost. It is estimated of probable cost should be periodically revised by the engineers as the design moves forward and more information becomes known. So, the client is normally responsible for providing estimates of those costs which may lie outside the civil engineering knowledge or expertise, such as those in the legal, land, administrative, and financial areas. Construction costs. These costs shall include the cost of management or supervision of construction or installation provided by a separate construction, or installation provided by a separate construction manager or contractor, plus a reasonable allowance for each manager contractors, overhead, and profit, and also the owner and equipment design specified as of specifically by the design professional. Legal, land, administration, staffing, and financial costs. This is a probable total project cost and can be estimated in cooperation with the clients because they are usually outside the knowledge and control of the civil engineer. Contingency allowance. It is a time allocated during the planning for unscheduled events. Technical and personal disruption results in changes in the direct production cost. It is calculated in special contingency times studies, the result of which yield rates for indirect production costs. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and pleasant day to each one of you. Minimum compensation for civil engineer as prime professional. When the civil engineer assumes overall coordination including architectural, other engineer services, the engineer is prime professional.
Part E. Minimum compensation for civil engineer as prime professional. When the civil engineer assumes overall coordination, including architectural and other engineering services. The engineer is a prime professional. If the civil engineer is not the prime professional for the above groups, but renders basic civil engineering services only, his fee shall be minimal of 25% of the prime professional fee. Part B. Minimum compensation for civil engineer as professional no prime. When the civil engineer renders basic engineering design services, only his fee shall be as follows.
For Group 1, minimum compensation for civil engineers for rendering the following services.